Welcome to Arabs in Media. You can find us on all podcast platforms, and you can find our written content also on Substack at Arabs in Media. I'm your host, Hazem Jamal, and today we are talking about Germany. Now, one of the big failures of American news media for generations has been very little coverage of international news. Most Americans, I would say, can't find most countries on a map unless we're bombing them or supplying the bombs. And even then, a lot of times we can't find that on the map as a collective. We don't get exposed to the structures of other countries, and maybe we just rely on very vague perceptions or understandings. So Germany, if you've been paying attention, has been one of the places where pro-Palestine demonstrations have been hit hard with police brutality. Some of these images are pretty shocking, but as even many of the protests here in the U.S. have received a near military response at times, we wanted to talk to somebody on the ground. And so please welcome to Arabs in Media from Germany, a Palestinian activist, not just for liberation, but for climate justice, Salah Said. Welcome to Arabs in Media.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I know you bring a wealth of knowledge. I've been following your socials. It has been difficult to watch some of the images, just as it is anywhere, to see peaceful protesters get flung to the ground, beaten, punched, kicked, people sometimes walking down the street and being shoved from behind to the ground. Just from a visual standpoint, we're going to include some of these clips on social media if, as a listener to the podcast right now, you have not seen any of this stuff and this is all new to you. And to many Americans, I think it will be very new to them. But as a Palestinian living your life in Germany, you have a unique experience. What's going on?
It's really tough. Let me say that. So the reality for someone with a Palestinian background or for a Palestinian growing up in Germany is that you will grow up with a lot of racism and discrimination. And that's just something that I think the majority of people with a migration background, especially from the Middle East, will just experience. And it's part of life here. Can be very structural. It's something you'll experience at school, at work, and university. And when you add on top of it that you're Palestinian, then you also realize that this is a topic that is absolutely not popular to talk about. So as soon as you will say, hey, I'm Salah and I'm Palestinian, the next question might be, what do you think about the weather? Or what do you think about this course? Like, people will not indulge into the conversation. They will not ask you a lot about it. And growing up here, I used to feel that, it's because of Germany's past with the Holocaust, and it's because of Germany's feeling towards, guilt and Germans not wanting to talk about their past, which I personally believe is absolutely wrong, because we should be continuously talking about the past in order to learn from it and in order to not commit those crimes against humanity again. But in Germany, that's a little different. Despite the fact that you constantly hear about the Holocaust and the Nazi time at school and university, and it's really ingrained into the curriculum, it first of all only focuses on Jewish life and anti-Semitism and completely ignores the fact that there was other people that were impacted by the Holocaust as well. And it's also being glorified as something as this is the worst thing that ever happened to humanity. Basically saying that every other genocide doesn't matter that much. And one example is the Namibian genocide, which Germany also initiated. So Germany tends to be on the wrong side of history. And instead of learning from it and making sure things get better, it kind of still supports very horrific things. So as a Palestinian in Germany, I'll come to the questions around police brutality. The reality is that we're being neglected and that our identity is being suffocated. And it reached really an alarming level because after the 7th of October, the Palestinian flag was banned. The kofiyeh, or scarf, was banned as well. And every single protest in solidarity with Palestine was banned. And instead, we will see in the capital of the city, of the country, Germany, Berlin, instead, we will only see Israeli flags on every single government building. So how should I feel as a Palestinian that made his life in Germany and grew up here and was his whole life an active community member, started a nonprofit, got several awards for my community engagement and activism by the government, by certain, nonprofit institutions. And from one day to another, my voice doesn't matter. And I'm being stripped from my fundamental rights to protest and to have a freedom of speech. And going back to that thing of, I used to say free Palestine from German guilt, I think it's just very inaccurate after, reviewing and experiencing the last 10 months during the genocide here. I think the accurate sentence to say is free Palestine from German racism, because that is what we're experiencing.
Mm. You mentioned right after October 7th, the imagery, just the Palestinian flag being banned and protests being banned. And to me, that doesn't square with Germany's image that they promote as being a democracy, having freedom of speech. How has that been managed in terms of the courts or the legality of it? Or are all of these protests that are now being assaulted by police, are they illegal protests because laws were created to keep them from being freedom of speech in reality?
Yeah, the reality is didn't happen for the first time. So we had, for instance, Nakba demonstrations last year that have been banned, other Palestine solidarity protests that have been banned in the past, but it just got to a level where it just turned into another extreme. So basically, a Palestine flag was the same as a Hamas flag, or everyone who says I'm Palestinian also basically saying I'm a Hamas supporter. And Germans don't make that differentiation. So there were these new policies that basically flat out banned all these protests. But what we did was to resist and to say, no, if you're claiming to be a democratic country and part of our core values is freedom of speech and our right to protest, then we will continue to take it to the street. And the reality for us here really is, and I have to say, Germany hosts the largest Palestinian diaspora community outside of the Middle East. Berlin alone accounts for, I think, 40 to 50,000 Palestinians. Mm-hmm. And in total, all across Germany, that's around 100,000 Palestinians that are not being represented. And they're not being represented by elected officials and politicians. It almost feels like they all met in a secret room and said, no matter what's going to happen, we're going to support Israel. And they invented this term in German. It says Staatsräson, that I think by now should be internationally known. And it's the raison d'etre that whatever is going to happen, Israel has impunity and everything's going to be justified by Israel's right to defend itself, no matter the human rights violations and the violations of international law. Germany will stand by Israel. So I think the repression we're experiencing and the extreme police brutality and those policies that are being put upon us, Palestinians and people in solidarity with Palestine in Germany, are the exact same thing as Germans' foreign politics. So in order to understand what that means is, Germany was amongst the first countries that obstructed humanitarian aid and defunded or froze funding towards UNRWA. Germany several times voted against a ceasefire. Germany continuously ships arms and weapons to Israel and is the second largest exporter of arms and weapons to Israel after the US. And they've increased the arms deliveries by 10 times after the 7th of October. And then we see all this repression happening on the streets. Of course, they're going to repress us because their foreign policy aligns with the fascist regime of the terrorist entity named Israel. So what we're experiencing is them carrying out their aiding and support of the genocide and letting us feel that they will continue to do so. And every person who's going to speak against it is basically their target. And it goes really beyond just repressing people at protests and police brutality. What we're seeing are extreme tactics of intimidation, house visits, raids, and the fear of deportation looming over every single protest. There are so many cases of deportation. We've seen an extreme uprise of right extremist parties. Just last week, the largest right extreme party, AfD, made a win in Saxony and Thüringen, which are large parts of Germany. So it is all very much connected.
Yeah, I saw that in the news last week, and that if the protests are kind of barely covered in the U.S. or in the West in Germany, it was even less so this under the radar win of extreme right wing parties in Germany for some state elections. Can you give a little bit of background of how that connects to immigration or the Palestinian reality in Germany?
Yeah, I mean, the current government is run by a left to center government, right? So you would expect they would be anti-war. Our foreign minister who leads the Green Party, her election campaign basically said no arms to conflict and war regions.
Hmm.
But the first thing she basically did as a foreign minister is to increase the arms deliveries to Israel, right? And that pretty much showed you how fake and unreal really these politicians are that claim to be center to left. The other aspect is Germany was pretty much welcoming towards refugees from Syria and other places of the world, and did a lot of effort to bring in a workforce. And the reality is Germany has a huge problem with workforce, and the majority of migrants here in Germany play a vital role in German economy and really make Germany be one of the largest powers in Europe, which is great. So obviously taking in refugees doesn't just come with them being a great nation that wants to help other people. It's also obviously them benefiting from those people doing labor that Germans may not want to do. But the reality is there is not so much effort in terms of integration and bringing cultures together, but rather the idea that everyone who comes here really needs to live up to what they define as German values. But this is just a multicultural society, especially when you look at Berlin as a hotspot. You can compare it to New York, you'll find people from everywhere. So instead of just accepting those different realities and embracing those cultures, Germany likes to pretend that it's very diverse and inclusive. In fact, it is diverse, but it's not inclusive. And what we're seeing over the last, I would say, 8 to 12 years is an extreme uprising of the right. It's not as extreme and polarized as it is in the US or in other European countries where we saw also an uprising of the right, for instance, in the Netherlands or in Sweden, Switzerland, or Austria. It's happening all across the world. But here it is happening to an extent where the current government is actually fueling that uprising of the right. So that should be contradictory to what they're currently doing, right? But in connection to the Palestine movement, this is what happened. So a flat out ban on everyone showing solidarity with Palestine. Obviously, these people are German citizens, and they are not only Palestinians, but they're also anti-Zionist Jews. There are people from Syria, Iraq, and it's a very diverse group of people that is part of this movement. So one of the initial headlines we read from Germany's prime minister, the chancellor, Olaf Scholz, was, "We need to deport en masses," basically saying that anyone who doesn't adhere to Germany's values should be deported. And then what we're seeing is a constant dehumanization and delegitimization of people who are taking it to the streets, who are being portrayed as terror supporters, as anti-Semites, as people that do not adhere to this term German values. So by us being demonized and the media, as well as the politicians, framing us as people that don't appreciate living here and that are not active citizens and contributing citizens to this country, they are fueling the hate crimes, they are fueling anti-Palestinian and anti-Muslim racism. And we've seen this in the number, the increase on attacks on Muslims is extremely increasing. It's doubled from 2022 to 2023, and it's constantly increasing.
How much of immigration, which has been going on for decades, is unpopular with German society? I mean, I look at this in a couple of different buckets. One bucket is popular opinion, which can be fueled by media and government. But then you look at the governmental part of this, like banning Palestinian symbols or protests in the street. And we have similar things in the US where we talk about freedom of speech, but then they'll put laws around and restrictions around some of those abilities to protest. And they'll come in and they'll break up what was otherwise legal yesterday. And so ultimately, I think, and it'll be too much time before it's worth it, some of these things will be found unconstitutional. Some of these things, once they're pursued in the courts through due process, are just anti-American. How much of what's happening right now is anti-German by their own words and laws and constitution?
Right. I think this is an excellent question, and it's something that I've been trying to tell Germans, not migrant Germans, but actually Germans, that this isn't just about Palestine. This is about them fighting for their fundamental rights in a democracy. It's about them losing ground right now when it comes to those extracurricular policies that the executive power is currently setting up that could be very much deemed as unconstitutional and not aligning with the German constitution.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to the chant "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," we see different court rulings, for instance, in Frankfurt or Mannheim, that actually say this is not a terrorist slogan and people should be allowed to say this, and this is part of their freedom of speech. But up until this very day in Berlin, for instance, this is still very much criminalized. So the majority of police brutality you see in the videos and the extremely unproportional use of violence against protesters starts with people chanting "from the river to the sea." Sometimes this is their justification of, I'm allowed now to push you to the ground and kick you in the face. And so, yeah, absolutely, that is the reality, that a lot of the things that are currently being discussed and a lot of these policies that the executive power is putting up there will be deemed unconstitutional. And it's right now where we need Germans to defend what they call German democracy and their constitution. So it's really fundamental. And I think, it makes it even more clear that when a political system really fails to represent its citizens, including Palestinians, it really becomes our moral duty to resist and to refuse to be intimidated and to refuse to be silenced and to continuously take it to the streets. We have to do this.
Is there a public reaction, negative or positive, to some of this brutality at the protests? I'm assuming that these images circulate in media, but it could be that they're just staying in social media and that corporate media or government media is not covering it. What is the awareness? What is the exposure of what's actually happening?
To be honest, this is a mind-blowing thing, because you recall George Floyd, right?
Yeah.
The killing and the police brutality, and everyone and their mother, rightfully so, went out to the streets and protested. And in Germany, this happened in the US, but everyone in Germany was out in the streets. The amount of police brutality and violence and abuse and even sexual violence protesters are experiencing in Germany has not sparked a second of media attention or public discourse. It is only now, after 10 months, where we see the first articles that are dealing with the fact that Germany is not making a debate and a public discourse about the police brutality people are facing that are peacefully protesting. Up until this very day, even Amnesty International Germany did not start an investigation, although we've sent them several statements and documentation. But finally, Amnesty International started the investigation against the German police and their violence against pro-Palestine protesters. And that really tells you something, that there is no interest to talk about our reality. There is no interest to make us human and to tell our stories and to tell what we have to say, because the only story we will see is about the victimization of Israel and how Israel has the right to defend itself. And I think it makes it even more important, despite all this repression, to not be distracted and to not dilute the attention towards us who are being repressed by the state. It makes it even more important to realize that this is a distraction from what is happening in Gaza and in the West Bank, from all the atrocities and war crimes that Germany is complicit in. And I feel bad sometimes going and talking about what is happening in Germany, because I feel like this is taking attention from those people that are risking their lives on a daily basis for us to get an image or a video snippet of how the Palestinian suffering and plight is happening by the minute and how people are being slaughtered by the minute. And no one in Germany is reporting that. And that is crazy to me.
Yeah,
So,
that was my next question, honestly, because there is the social media component and how it influences certain populations or younger generations. But then there's the establishment media and corporate media and how they either cover what's happening, but the other part of it is how are these news stories phrased and headlined? And this is famously a Western illness, in my opinion. The whole concept and impetus for talking about Arabs in media is talking about how Arabs are featured in news and entertainment
right.
in Western media. And, you know, I had been trying to single out individual instances of this manually, scouring the web and looking at mainstream news sources until this AI tool came along called News Court, and they basically aggregate thousands of pieces of news, and they're like, here's where the bias is. Since it's in English, we're not getting that for German language publications or online sources, but I can only imagine what the disconnect is when you read a headline, yet you know the opposite is happening on the street.
It is vile. Like, it is really vile here in Germany. The amount of racist news, not only biased news, but racist news. And I mean, one of the largest media outlet in Germany is Axel Springer, who actually runs something like Craigslist in occupied Palestine in the West Bank and advertises homes in occupied lands. And it has a very clear policy towards reporting about the occupation, and it has also fired journalists if they do not adhere to it. And we see that, and that's the largest media house in Germany. The other thing we're seeing is a constant targeting of activists and people in solidarity with Palestine. So many people, including me, have been smeared as terrorist sympathizers or terrorists or anti-Semites without any foundation, without talking to you, without trying to reach out to you. It's really something that we're constantly seeing, and that is increasing. But I also feel that the public reaction to all of this is mixed, and it's changing. On the one hand, it's becoming more polarized with the right extremists, uprising and feeling empowered to attack us on the streets openly and really come and violate people. We've seen a lot of racism. We've seen shops being attacked. We've seen a lot of things. Look, it's forbidden, it's illegal in Germany to compare anything to like the Third Reich, which is like the time leading up to the Holocaust, right? But if you dare to draw these parallels, you actually realize real quickly that there are some tactics that formerly have been used and now are being used against Muslims and people from the Middle East. And they are just here to demonize us and to show that we are not worthy, our voices aren't worthy, and we don't belong here. Well, when it comes to me, I don't want to be here. I can't wait to go back to Palestine. If Palestine would be free, I wouldn't spend a day in Germany.
I think it's, when I hear you referring to the defensive posture you're forced to react to because of the surroundings and the environment that you're in Germany, it almost makes me feel like we got to jump out and proactively, like, this is a great moment for us to say, the genocide in Gaza has killed at least 40,000 Palestinians, at least 17,000 children. These are not abstract, protests that are, we decided we're going to make, trouble for Germany. These are like human issues that, once you see the images and you understand the realities, everybody should be look for a modicum of humanity to persevere through this. And that's what I find really fascinating about the German scenario, because it's often the counter narrative of accusations and finger pointing. Those are the things that are huge distractions, and they keep us from solving the real issues. And to your point of, it makes one feel almost guilty for taking a moment away from the hardships and the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza and now in the West Bank. Uh, 70% of the infrastructure in Jenin has been completely destroyed. There's no Hamas in the West Bank. This is like bulldozing streets, making them impassable, destroying water infrastructure, settlers seizing places of worship to deface it. These are just tips of the iceberg, having a pause to distribute polio vaccines and then bombing the areas where the polio vaccines are being distributed. These are real facts, and the media is doing a huge failure internationally to not cover this, except for Al Jazeera, Middle East Eye. Where is the tipping point in your mind for people to wake up and see this destruction of humanity?
Look, I think those who want to know, they know. And I think, even for those people that are trying to say, I'm not going to see this, I'm just trying to pull this away, and I believe what the government is saying and what the mainstream media is saying. I think even for those people, they realize something is off. There is way too much evidence. There's way too much debunked news of the terrorist entity, Israel. There is so much that people know, but they just choose to stand with the occupation. And I think, if anything, that became clear to me. And I talked about this the other day to a friend, and we were discussing, Germans that are being silent and are not saying anything, and they're ignoring our suffering, and they're ignoring our messages about Gaza and Palestine overall, versus those Germans that are openly Nazis and that are openly racist. And to be honest, I would feel more safe knowing that someone is an open racist and Nazi rather than someone who's silent and is not reacting and telling me anything, because I feel like this person is betraying humanity and this person cannot be trusted. Because there is no aspect of being neutral. You're either condemning Israel for all the atrocities and all the evidence that have been put forward against them under international law. Like, their fucking prime minister is warranted by the ICC. If you don't see that, then you're just stupid. Like, it doesn't make sense. And I think there is no moment of awakening. I think it's a fight, and I think we have to resist this fight. And this fight is happening in the media, and this fight is happening in the public sphere, and we have to take it to the street, and we have to resist. I always say, if countries don't follow international law, why would we as citizens need to obey to this constitution? We have to fight this. We have to change it, and we have to change it from within. And we have to do this, and we owe this to our fellow Palestinians. We owe this to our fellow humans that are being slaughtered. It's way too many children, and it's increasing by the day. You mentioned the number of 40,000 earlier, but let's call it what it is. The Lancet says it's between 150 to 200,000 Palestinians that have been killed, and that it's excluding the 700 martyrs in the West Bank. And we have to constantly say this, and we have to not allow them to dehumanize us and delegitimize our protest, because we know that's what they want to do. And we know that they've been trying to do this for 76 years. Is nothing new to us. So one message from me is to all of those organizations and people in solidarity with us is, let Palestinians speak. We know our history. We know what has happened to us. And even to us Palestinians in the diaspora, including me, make space for voices from Palestine, from the occupied West Bank and Gaza and occupied Palestine overall. Let them speak. They are living the genocide. They are living the daily occupation. My job is to amplify their voices. We can argue about how Palestine should look like when it's finally free, but there's a little bit of a way to go up until that day. And to everyone else, now is the time to ask ourselves, how do we want to rebuild Palestine? What is my role? Where do I want to live? What am I going to explore? And I think as soon as we manifest this idea and the reality that we are going back, it's going to be so easy for us to go back.
That's really important, what you're saying, of having Palestinians at the table. This is something that crosses my mind all the time when I see coverage of diplomatic conversations. I'm like, where's the Palestinian?
Yeah.
So-and-so speaking to so-and-so. And I'm like, There's no Palestinian in that mix. Well, what's going on with that?
There's so many amazing Jewish brothers and sisters that come and speak up for our rights, and they are
Hmm.
anti-Zionist and all of that. And I love that, and they should continue to do that. But why does the world believe something when it comes out of a white person's mouth? We've been telling them the exact same things for decades. And that is what enrages me and makes me angry about this world, that when we say it, it doesn't count. So, no, I don't want a white savior. I don't want people to come and rescue us. No one rescued Palestinians this far. So, we need to free ourselves from this.
Yeah. There must be a pretty unique feeling of isolation within the Palestinian diaspora. I mean, part of the mental games I put myself through and sadness and depression when I go through my social media feeds is, why isn't everybody jumping up and down screaming about this? And maybe internally they are. And it's really hard to find that balance between um, not knowing what somebody is in somebody's heart when you're walking down the street, even, and wanting them to stand up for humanity. But the the reality of a Palestinian like yourself must be complex.
Yeah, at least to say, I mean, obviously it's hard and obviously it's tough to, grow up as a Palestinian knowing you're born into the struggle. And I mean, that's true for a lot of people across the globe. It's not just true for Palestinians. And I think what gives me power is to meet people from other communities that connect with our struggle and that understand that it's interconnected, and we're fighting colonization and we're fighting imperialism. And there's an opportunity here to free all people and not just Palestinians. It's not just our fight and it's not just our struggle, from climate justice to the Black Lives Matter movement to so many more interconnected struggles in Congo, Sudan, and beyond. We have to be united in this. And it's even more so the reality of the people of the global south that are uprising, that are enraged, that finally need to strike back and take back what's theirs and hold those Western colonizers accountable. And I think that this realization is coming through in this movement. I don't think in all our plight as Palestinians from the Nakba and even before, we never had so much attention, support, and solidarity. This is not saving a single life in Gaza or the West Bank per day. It's not saving anyone. We have to realize that.
Mm.
But what it's doing is that it's progressing our fight for freedom and not just our fight. And when we can realize that, then it's okay to say, I don't need a space for my rage or my anger or my sadness. It's okay to pull through because it's worth fighting for freedom.
That is incredibly powerful, and well stated, because I can only speak for myself. Being outside of the bubble of being Palestinian, but being an Arab American, being of Iraqi heritage, who have certainly witnessed from a Western country the destruction of the country my parents were born and raised in. I don't know that people grasp the reality of the personal pain involved in seeing your people or a people attempted to be wiped out. And at the same time, you have to live a daily life. Like you have to, you go to work, you need to pay the bills, you need to go to the dentist, you need to take care of things that are part of your day to day. And it's hard to forget for a second the reality of what's happening there. So you've got to be able to find that balance and take care of yourself physically, emotionally, mentally.
I will say this, and you are totally right. And thank you so much for sharing this. And this really is a great example of how our struggles are interconnected and how the Palestinian cause exceeds being Palestinian. And it's not identity politics or anything that matters for that thing. It's really something that should bring people together and free people. and people that are being oppressed and colonized and destroyed and, attempted to be killed and ethnically cleansed and all of this. But to your point of daily life, there's this statement that you probably also read 1,000 times: existence is resistance. And it means so much, because as a Palestinian, for me and for a lot of people I talk to on a daily basis from Gaza, existence means we are still Palestinians, and they haven't wiped us out, and they haven't stolen every aspect of our identity, of our food, and appropriated our culture and heritage and all of this. And we know they tried to do this. That's this good example of the how do you say deer, like the Palestinian mountain deer, which is like a species that is about to go extinct. And it's only there almost like in the West Bank are like the few spots where you can spot it. But what the occupation did was to bring a Farsi deer, like a deer from Iran, to occupied Palestine, and to grow this species. And you can go and hunt the Palestinian mountain deer that was everywhere, in former Palestine, historic Palestine. And what you see on the occupation's money, the shekel, is on the 100 shekel, you would see that Irani deer. And it's their attempt, again, to not only ethnically cleanse us and steal our heritage and our culture and our food, but it's also trying to make our biodiversity extinct. And you see this also with our olive groves and all these plants and biodiversity that used to live in Palestine. There is an attempt to erase that by bringing flowers and plants and forestation from Europe that does not belong to this indigenous land, right? And that's because they don't know how to treat the indigenous land. They don't know how to treat it as the natives do. So why I'm saying this is existence is resistance, and us still claiming that we're Palestinians and we will not forget and we will know our history and we will get educated around this. It's so important. Just breathing is already something that they want to forbid us. And I want to quote Mido Halimi, Allah yarhamu, 19-year-old influencer and broadcaster from Gaza, who was killed by Israel last week. And he said in one of his videos, and it resonated with me the first time I saw it: planting is resistance. And in Gaza, he was planting close to his tents, and he would share videos and show how the plant was growing. And that is resistance. It is resistance, and we can go back to our daily things, and we should smile, even though it's hard. We should smile, and we should have a life, and we should have conversations, and we should do the daily things. And that is important for us, but we should not stop resisting in any shape or form.
That's gorgeous. I really want to reference an article to bring up here, because it's just about everything you said, extremely well stated. And I want to be able to reference it. And you probably already see this: Making Space for Palestinian Happiness. I'm going to...
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it made me weep, this article.
I haven't seen this, and I'm excited. I'm just like seeing, and I'm like, I need to read this.
Oh, I mean, I'll tell you right now that my good friend Riyadh, he's Palestinian. We've known each other for 30, 40 years. And part of my healing in working through this was trying to reconnect with him, because I thought of him every day when this started in October, and I felt shame that I hadn't done more sooner with my voice. And, it was more like, how can I be of service? How can I right a wrong? And, we've reconnected beautifully. We got to catch up, and, he sent me this. And it was right when I was having a block, because I was getting overwhelmed and depressed by just one massacre after another.
Right.
They're happening so fast and furious. They're meant to fuck you up and blur all together so that it loses the atrocity of the atrocity, because it becomes so normal.
Exactly.
And I thought, if I live in rage, how is anybody going to hear a message? And when he sent me this, it was just like, it brought the humanness back to life. And so this article is called Making Space for Palestinian Happiness. I'll re-link it to this current article that recaps our podcast and our conversation. But it's true. It's like existence is resistance. And I spoke to a comic on the last episode, a comedian, a woman named Yasmin Al-Hadi, and this was the same question I posed to her towards the end. And it was, how do you manage through all of this stuff? And she summed it up by saying, hey, we're still getting married. We're still having babies. We're existing. There's been a break in the iceberg, changing the discourse and the conversation. And we're in the right direction. And I hold space for people who are, in that movement, making these things happen. And I'm paraphrasing, but to me, this is the common thread that I'm hearing now from multiple people, which is, just living is the best form of resistance on some
It
level.
is. It really is. And it shouldn't obviously take away from us asking the people to do more. And this is the thing, right? Like, would you ever ask someone who's going through a lot of shit in their lives to do something, and we kind of have to? We can't just be, we can't just, I'd love to just focus on my career and everything else I've been doing, but you can't. And I think it's your duty. And I love that you shared the story of your friend reaching out, and that is something maybe that a lot of people should be doing. It's just reaching out. Just reach out. Like, the person before they were enraged, before them struggling through life and going through life like hell because they're seeing what is happening to their fellow people. Just reach out. And it's okay to be angry, and it's so okay. For a moment, I was hating myself because everything I would be doing is just being angry and being mad and angry at everyone around me. And I started to be really like hard to be around. And I used to be this person that constantly smiles about everything, jokes about everything, and I want that back, and it's part of me. And I feel like finally I'm getting to a place where that is happening again. But we cannot forget. And all of this, I think the most important thing, despite living and resisting and that being the important thing, we have to hold those people, governments, and companies accountable.
Yeah.
And we will not just ask for an end to the genocide. We're asking for a complete liberation. And our demands need to be really, really clear. And this is about justice and not just about ceasefire. And I feel like people still don't get that. And if you didn't get that, then please go and talk to a Palestinian.
Yes. We can all agree on that, I think. Wow. That is, that's very poignant. I have to thank you, Salah, for your words and your heart discussing this topic.
I want to say thank you, and I really appreciate you offering this platform and that space, and I think a lot more people should be doing it because we need those platforms and we need the space. And I was able to look into some of your work, and I got excited beyond Palestine. So thank you so much for what you're doing, and keep on doing it.
Thank you for joining us. We do a little segment every once in a while called the shout out, where we try to call out somebody who's doing something really good. And it could be an organization that has created tech infrastructure to get people to be aware of products that support Palestinian business owners or creators, or it could be a friend who called you up when you needed it, or it could be a politician who surprised you by doing the right thing and the moral thing. Is there anybody top of mind that comes to mind that you would want to shout out at this point?
There's a bunch of organizations to support. Just check out my Instagram. But
Okay.
top of my head is my mom and my two sisters who have been louder than ever and who are taking it with me to the street and yeah, make me not feel alone in this. And they're so powerful women, and I feel like women are going to bring back Palestine.
Inshallah. That's beautiful. That's
Inshallah.
great. That is great. Um, well, I wish many blessings to your mom and your sisters, to yourself, to your family, to your extended family in the diaspora, to all Palestinians, to people who love peace, to people who love humanity, to people who are against genocide and colonialism. Um, you know, we're going to include your social media in the Substack article, but if you could give it here, I'll also put it in the podcast notes so everybody knows where to find the information that you share, which is extremely important to be sharing, liking, commenting on so that the word can get out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Salah.
Thank you.
Salah Said, activist, Palestinian, living in Berlin, and joining us to tell us about what's happening in Berlin. Remember, Habibi, genocide is always wrong. Thanks for listening to Arabs in Media.